Hello there, guys. At the risk of sounding like every other YouTuber out there, I'd really appreciate it if you'd click the subscribe button. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything, and it allows my channel to grow, which means guests like the one you're about to watch, as well as more, would be willing to come on. Just give it a like, give it a subscribe, and we'll go from there. All right, thank you, and enjoy this episode. So, on today's episode of Laments, we've got author James Sale. How are we, James?
Awesome. Really glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Dean. I really appreciate it.
No, I'm really happy to have you. I'm really happy to have you. I'm really keen to talk about your new book, Gods, Heroes, and Us. Um, I don't know where to start, really. I really enjoyed it. That's the one. I really enjoyed it. It's what I took from it is how we need myths, heroes, and legends in the modern era. Um, but what really sort of started me off is in the intro to the book, you claim that it's never been more relevant. I'm paraphrasing there,
Mm.
that we need these myths. Why do you think that?
Well, I think it's very important to understand that we live in a world that's very scientific and very technological. And these kind of principles, these philosophical principles of science and technology have, in a sense, usurped the traditional view of what was meaningful. So the thing about a myth is that a myth is a story that happened once, but keeps happening. It keeps repeating itself. Now, if you think about that psychologically, that is actually quite an important principle that the myths tell us something about that's going to happen. It's already happened once, but it's going to happen again. So one of the examples I use in the beginning of the Greek myths book is actually to talk about the most famous myth of all myths that we have in the Western Hemisphere. And the most famous myth of all, I mean, it's usually one of two. We can either say it's the flood. That is a very famous myth. And it's kind of like really strange, but I only know of one culture. Every culture in the world has a myth of the flood. There's only one culture, I think, that doesn't, which is the Japanese culture, which, given where its geographic location is, seems very odd. But, everybody knows about the once upon a time, there was this incredible flood that destroyed humanity or nearly did. And it's a very important myth. It's got lots of very important ramifications, but there's an even more primary myth, which is really important to understand, particularly in the light of what I'm going to say anyway, which is, of course, the myth of the fall of man. Now, John Gray is a very famous philosopher and writer, and he is an atheist. And he said that, in fact, we really need to get to grips with this because all the post-Enlightenment, i.e., post-18th century scientific, technological progress depends upon the myth of progress, that human society is somehow progressing. It's a belief we have. It's not a fact that we have. It's actually a belief that we have, which goes against 5,000 years of human history, of which the myth of the fall is perhaps the most striking example. But it's not just in the Hebraic Bible. I mean, the Greeks themselves had a golden age, a silver age, a bronze age, an iron age. The Indian myths talk exactly the same about these ages before, which actually were better than the ages we have now. In other words, human beings aren't progressing, they're regressing, they're deteriorating, they're actually going down. And so when you have a myth like the fall, the power of it is this. It's not about going on about Adam and Eve and all this and trying to find faults in the story. The key thing about the power of the myth is that it's explanatory. It explains why people are like they are. So, for example, to give an extreme example, it explains why we have archbishops, bishops, priests, religious people who are paedophiles. And we say, well, how can they possibly be paedophiles? These people are devout Christians or devout religious. Well, of course, if you have a myth of the fall, what you're saying is that people have something in them that is imperfect, that no matter what they say they are, there is some other principle working that is going to undermine it. And so the myth of the fall explains so much of the evil that we find. So the myth of progress, at the end of it all, has the idea of there is a utopia. So the left wing, particularly progressive left wing parties, are always talking about someday, one day, the world will be perfect. If only we could abolish poverty. If only we could get rid of slavery. If only we could get rid of this, get rid of, if only education. I mean, education. We've had education in the UK since the mid 19th century. And do you know what? Are people any better as a result of all this education? Oh, if we just educate people, they'll get better. The myth of the fall says, actually, no, we're not going to get any better. And in fact, post having universal education in this country and in Germany, which was happening at the same time, by the way, more or less the same, 1870s, I know we've had the two worst wars in the history of the whole world, World War One, World War Two, and we're on the brink of one that's even worse than those two. I mean, where is education in all this? Why aren't we getting better? Why don't we learn from our mistakes? And the answer is the myth of the fall actually tells us there's something in human beings which is inherently flawed, which we need to accommodate rather than creating paradises, utopias, communism. Oh, we're all equal. It'll all be fine. No, it won't be fine. And all of history tells us it's not fine. Wake up, smell the coffee, get on board with what the myths are telling us. Now, that was just one myth that's not even specifically mentioned. Well, it's mentioned, but it's not. I'm not dealing with Hebraic stories. I'd like to write a book on Hebrew myths, actually, myself. Perhaps that will be a sequel to this one. But the Greek myths tell us equally these incredibly powerful things about reality. They're more real in a sense than science. That's a big claim, but they're more real in terms of what they tell us about the nature of the universe.
No, no, no. Actually, I've often wondered, excuse me, they say history is written by the victors of war. It makes you wonder when it comes to education, we hear about quite a lot of educators being activists. So you can learn about slavery, or you can learn about slavery from this angle or that angle. There's always a point to it. But I don't want to detract too much from that. It's just an opinion
Yeah,
I've had for a while. So another takeaway I got while reading that is that, and you sort of touched upon it there, is that the myth is a carrier of let's call it enduring truth rather than a
yes.
fiction. Yeah, they dress up in different ways, but mainly it's pretty much the same. How would you respond to I guess it's the dominant modern assumption that myths are untrue?
Well, I think one can all that one can do to that is you can say, well, that's wrong. Well, clearly, that's not evidence in itself, but it's actually to point to the richness of the myths and the stories. So, for example, a primary myth, which is running through the whole book, is this idea of hubris. So, for the Greeks, the biggest sin possible was hubris. And what was hubris? Hubris was, in fact, to deliberately ignore or defy the gods. And by the way, Jung saw, which is covered in the book, but Jung saw the gods as being kind of like physically kind of related to our own sort of whole body mind system. So that, for example, when we actually have sort of stomach aches and stuff and problems with our intestines, in fact, this was the god Zeus that was actually sort of ripping us apart in some way or other. So basically, to defy the gods was an act of hubris. So Apollo's number one maxim, there are three maxims which I cover in the book, but number one maxim is know thyself. Now, know yourself that's written on the oracle of Apollo, the great god of the sun and of light. We'll come to him in a minute. But basically, what does this mean? In the West, we have misinterpreted this. We have taken know thyself to mean do a psychometric test, do Myers-Briggs, find out, meditate a bit more, find out about yourself, congratulate yourself on what a wonderful person you are, believe in yourself, know yourself, and that's what it means. It doesn't mean that at all. What Apollo means by know yourself is know that you are a human being who is limited and under the jurisdiction of the gods. And if you defy that, so in other words, we are limited beings. We are not gods. Now, does this sound like a familiar story? I mean, all the religions of the world really talk about this whole idea of this hubris in which humans say, I will decide my own fate. I am in charge of everything. And the Greek myths are telling us, no, you're not in charge of your own fate. In fact, there's a limit. And since I knew I was going to talk about this, I have actually sort of, from the book, I quote from Statius, a wonderful example of hubris, which I think your viewers and listeners might enjoy, because this was a primary example. It sounds extreme because it is extreme. And of course, the Greek myths are full of these really extreme stories, but it's just a wonderful example of defying the gods. And it's in chapter 2. And it's actually the story of Capaneus the Proud, who is incidentally in Dante's hell. So if you read the Inferno by Dante, you will find Capaneus in a very nice low position in hell. It's a wonderful thing. But so what did he actually, Capaneus did? Well, he was one of the 7 against Thebes. He was one of the 7 great heroes who were going to destroy the city of Thebes, which had 7 gates. So the 7 heroes attacked from 7 different angles. And the thing about Capaneus was he was colossal. He was a warrior. He was totally intimidating. Nobody was stronger than Capaneus. And he was fearless and virtually unstoppable. And as he scales the wall on a ladder, and as he does so, he screams out at the top of his voice a taunt against the gods in whom he does not believe. Where are the sluggard sons of this accursed land, Bacchus and Alcides? Any lesser name I am ashamed to challenge. Rather come thou and strive with all thy flames against me, thou Zeus, king of the gods. Or art thou braver at frightening timid maidens with thy thunder, and raising the towers of thy father-in-law Cadmus? Stop me if you can, king of the gods, stop me. And even the gods themselves at this began to wonder whether Zeus was able to stop the fearless Capaneus. But then, even as he spoke, the thunderbolt struck him, hurled with the whole might of Zeus. His crest first vanished into the clouds, the blackened shield boss dripped, and all the hero's limbs were now illuminated. The armies both give way in terror where he may fall, what squadrons he may strike with his burning body. He feels the flame hissing within him, and his helmet and hair afire, and trying to push away the galling cuirass with his hand, touches the scorched steel beneath his breast. He stands, nevertheless, and turning towards heaven, pants out his life and leans his smoking breast on the hated battlements lest he should fall. But his earthly frame deserts the hero, and his spirit is released. Yet, had his limbs been consumed a whit more slowly, he might have expected a second thunderbolt. That is hubris. I'm in charge. You can't stop me. You can't stop me building a home on Mars. You can't stop me dimming the sun so that, in fact, we can stop climate change. You can't stop me blowing up an asteroid off its course because we're concerned that asteroids might actually collide with the Earth, not realizing if we knock it off its course, that's the very thing, as with Oedipus, that might happen to us. So these are examples given in the book that sort of concretize that incredible story of defiance of the gods. Hubris, it's a sin, and it's going on right now in the modern world, and people are going to suffer the consequences of it, not just the guilt. Yeah,
that is an amazing comparison. If you think of things like that you can compare in the modern world, and we have got situations, like you say, knocking an asteroid off course, Musk wanting to build houses on Mars and the moon and things like that.
Bill Gates trying to dim the sun. So
there was something about that as well.
There's something about it in the book. And of course, the thing I use in counter to that is the research that I cite from 2021. Apparently, there was some research done on over 70 million people in 30 countries about the cause of their death. And here's an astonishing thing when people talk about climate change. I mean, I'm not denying it's changing. I'm denying, though, what might be causing it. When they looked at over 70 million people in 13 countries and analysed the cause of death, 20 more people died of cold than did of heat. 20 times more people died of cold, hypothermia, than they did of actually heat problems. It's quite astonishing how we get taken up with these memes, these kind of views, everyone believes them, and nobody's examining what is actually really going on. And the thing is about it is we can do the examination. That's the sort of scientific observational part of it all. But the myths themselves already tell us there's something wrong with the idea that we are going to be doing all this stuff.
I wanted I wanted to get your take on something. After I finished reading your book, um, I had this sort of moment. I was watching a film with my family, one of the new superhero movies. Now, I've often thought, if you think of like the stories of old, like Hercules and things like that, and Zeus and Poseidon and that, would this is a bit of a less academic question, but would you say like superheroes are like the modern equivalent of the stories we had back then? So I don't know. I'm not going to say like obviously Thor's a given one because that's Norse mythology anyway, but nobody really, unless you have an interest in myths and legends, nobody really follows it. But if you look at the superhero genre, movies especially, I guess now, they're the modern equivalent of what those stories would have been in
Yes.
ancient times. Do you see where I'm going with that
I see exactly
comparison?
where you're going. Yeah, well, I think there's a number of psychological factors here which are really important. The first factor is this deep, deep need. I'm going to go from the sublime to the ridiculous in what I'm about to
Do it.
compare, okay? But so basically, so there's a deep, deep human need is actually we all of us want, it's a loaded word, but I'm going to say it, a savior.
Hmm.
We all want a savior. In fact, the existence of all religions, basically, all serious religions, always comes down to why do we need a religion? Because people feel there's something wrong. They need to propitiate something. There's something deep within us which feels that we're not saved. We're not, we need to, there's a death coming our way, and actual fact, what's beyond death, and all these. We need a savior. So it shouldn't surprise us that the Greek myths are rich with. I mean, Heracles is a quintessential savior who 12 labors of Hercules. And in fact, I'm currently doing a whole series for the Epoch Times in New York. In fact, I've reached the eighth labor of Hercules, but they're all linked to the 12 signs of the zodiac. So there's a sort of universal. So on the one hand, there is this big need for a savior. But at the ridiculous level, I was watching last night one of my favorite fictional characters, Hercule Poirot, the Agatha Christie character, whom I love. And there's a lot in the stories about Hercule Poirot about, some of these villains, these evil villains are people. I mean, I've just been reading the one about, this killer who's really been abandoned by his mother, and his mother was a killer anyway. And so, but when you actually look at all the stories of Hercule Poirot, what do you find? You actually find there's nothing really in the background of Hercule Poirot about his mother, his father. Eventually, Christie gets onto the fact he was in the Belgian police force. We know a little bit he's in World War One, but actual fact, there's no siblings, there's no uncles, there's no cousins. And what's this like? It's actually just like, let's just take a complete thing. It's like Clint Eastwood and The Man with No Name. The man who comes out in the Western stories of the hero, who is Clint, who is the man with no name? Has he got a mum? Has he got a dad? Has he got a brother? No. So we love the stories of the heroes who come out of nowhere, save the town, save the crime, put things back to order. And this is where it comes into the Greek myths, because the whole starting point of my book is not with the beginning of the universe, the cosmos, as they call it. By the way, cosmos is a word which I prefer to the word universe in this context, because the word cosmos is related to our word cosmetic. So when you do your cosmetics, you make your face up. You make it. It's quite consciously, it's made in a certain way. So the universe seems to evolve in Greek stories from almost like nothing and chaos. And this chaos goes on from the first generation of the sky and the earth to the Titans and to Kronos. And Kronos and the Titans are barbarians. They are, and we've got the word Kronos, chronometer, time. Time eats itself. And so Kronos ate his own children. Every second eats the next second. We are locked into this dreadful sequence of time, which is eating us up. But cleverly, Zeus avoided being consumed and then took control and then became the father of the universe. Cronus wasn't the father, Zeus was, and he established order. And that order had a series of, as you know, because you've read the book, a series of qualities in it. But, like order, law, justice, hierarchy, stability, peace, and actually ultimately beauty. But the thing about the law and order, which made it so different from Kronos and the dog eat dog world that Kronos had established, where might is right, was that the order applied to Zeus himself. It applied to all the Olympians. So there was an order which was actually something that led to peace. One of the deepest psychological needs of all human beings is the desire for peace of mind. We don't have it. We're racked by guilt. We're racked by shame. We're racked by fear. We have all these things, and what we're looking for is peace. So the establishment of order was a way of leading the universe to a state of beauty and of peace. And the whole history of the universe from Zeus onwards, including and especially including his divine children like Apollo, like Athene, and his semi-divine children like Heracles and Perseus in particular, they were actually continuing the work of Zeus, because Zeus never finally and fully overcame all the evil that still remained. So it was left to his offspring to defeat the monsters. The 12 labors of Hercules are classic examples of completing the work of his father. And in a way, I'm sure you can see there's a parallel here with the Christian religion, as in Jesus coming to defeat the evil that is still here on the earth as a result of the evil that was there in the beginning. So there's an archetypal story here where these things are in parallel, where we ourselves as human beings need to align ourselves with the myths, with Zeus, with God, with Jesus, or with the forces of good. And that's another thing that this book's about. You see, I mean, people think of morality as being like, oh, there's politics, there's philosophy, there's art, there's this, there's that, there's all these things, and there's morality, as if morality were another category like these. It's not a category like these. Morality informs all the categories of our life. So politics without morality is dead. Philosophy without morality is just talking. Art without morality is it's just what we've currently got with modern art. It's just, can I just say this one bad word? It's just,
oh yeah, feel free.
Shit.
It is shit.
It's just shit.
I haven't seen a piece of modern art and I've gone, cool, that's nice. No. I even remember actually something that's always stuck with me. I'm a crap artist, just for the record. I can barely draw a stick, man, just for the record. But I remember in high school, I was in an art lesson, and we'd seen that someone had literally screwed up a piece of paper and put it in an art exhibit as modern art. And I remember thinking, I could have done that. That's how bad it is.
I know.
That's how bad it is. I could have done that.
Feel free to cut this out of the interview. This is not live, is it?
No, but I don't edit, so say what you need to say.
Well, it's this actually, 10 weeks in the summer, the Athelhampton House near Dorchester, which is a lovely country house, fabulous grounds estate. Myself and my wife and 3 other artists have got an exhibition on related to my Dante-inspired epic poem with the artwork that goes with it. They're all illustrated and created beautiful artwork. I mean, real art. So I'll send you details of that in due course. But essentially what I'm saying is people are still doing the art, but the trouble is it's not in the mainstream. The mainstream media buys into the kind of, the unmade bed and all this sort of, complete stuff, which really isn't art. It's just conceptual.
Well, look at architecture. The Romans, not Romans. We were talking about the Romans.
The Greeks.
The Victorians is where I'm going.
Oh, the Victorians, yeah.
The Victorians had some elegance in the way they built things. You look at some of the buildings from that era, and then you look at a building that was finished completion last week, and you think, that just looks like a box. It looks like a video game character that hasn't loaded properly. And then you look at all the tube stations in Moscow. Beautiful.
Never been there, but I'll take your word for it.
No, I've seen the pictures. They've got chandeliers and they've made effort. Effort was made at some point. And I think we've definitely lost something along the line, actually.
Well, you've mentioned Moscow, but for me, the ultimate country for culture is Italy. I mean, I mean, you just go to Venice or you go, to loads of places in Italy, anywhere in Italy. You go anywhere in Italy, and you just find so much beauty, and it's a rebuke. It's a rebuke to modern architecture, to modern art, to modern music, even. Um, I mean, I'm going to sound very old because it's like, oh, when I was young, we had the Beatles and we had the Beach Boys and we had some great music. I mean, I listen to a lot of this stuff now and I'm thinking, I mean, it's not, I've got one of those accounts where you got 100 million tracks,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Amazon Music thing. And I try occasionally to, and I won't mention the name of this particular artist because I don't want to upset people who really like them, but they've sold, hundreds of millions of copies of stuff. They've got modern artists. And I'm listening to this music, I think, she's just so bland. AI could have written this. It's
Yeah.
just dreadful.
No, no,
No, the Beatles and the Pink Floyd, it could not have been written by AI. It's just too idiosyncratically personal.
I'm not a huge controversial statement. I'm not a fan of the Beatles,
No,
but I do
I'm not a
like
huge fan.
I
I'm
do
not a
like the
huge fan.
Rolling Stones. I do like the Rolling.
I only use that as a marker for that period of time. And they were, one can never deny, they were the. If you want my favourite band, it would be. I mean, I just love Mark Knopfler, Dire Straits. I mean,
Okay, okay.
somebody once said, if you want virtuosity on a guitar, you go for Jimi Hendrix. If you want power on the guitar, and I love this guy, you go for Clapton. But if you want beauty on the guitar, you go for Knopfler. I mean,
Ah.
Knopfler's beautiful playing. Some of his tracks are just fabulous. But I love Clapton too. Clapton's good.
See, my wife
So,
says that I listen to a lot of old man rock. So, like, you got your Bob Seger, you've got your CCR and stuff like that. Bad
ooh,
Company.
yeah. Oh, Bad Company,
Yeah, yeah.
yes,
The
yeah.
Kinks as well. I got some Kinks
Oh,
albums.
yes,
But then
yeah.
again, some of the modern stuff, like my kids really like Imagine Dragons, and because my kids like Imagine Dragons, I now have heard it a million times
Well,
myself.
I'm going to give you the ultimate question to answer in a pub quiz. Okay, the answer to this question. I was there at the time. What was number one in the UK when England won the World Cup in 1966?
I was not born in 1966. It's 20
Well,
years
I
too
was
early.
there, man. I was boogieing. Do you know the answer to that
Boogie.
question? Yeah, the Kinks. Sunny afternoon.
Oh, what a song as well.
Three weeks at number one while England was winning the World Cup. Sunny afternoon.
Sunny
That's
afternoon.
isn't that brilliant?
That is a quality song. And in
Yeah.
the
That's a quality.
summertime as well,
Oh,
Mungo Jerry. What a
oh,
song.
that's a bit later, man. That was a bit later. That's 4 or 5 years later. But sunny afternoon. Oh, you mentioned you like the Kinks. I like the Kinks. That
Yeah.
was really good. Good.
My parents brought me up on music of their era. And even though I found my own way, like I like a bit of Metallica. Like I like rock, essentially.
Yeah.
I like a little bit of Metallica. I like a little bit of Megadeth and stuff like that. I like the heavier stuff as well.
Yeah, you do like the
Um,
heavier stuff.
yeah, yeah. I've got to be in the mood now. I'm not an angry teenager anymore. I've got to be in that sort of zone. But um, I I just sort of like my classic rock or old man rock is of the era of my parents, but they didn't like a lot of it. Like my dad would say that he liked CCI, probably named two songs, and one of them was Bad Moon Rising, which I think everyone knows.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. It was a great
so
track.
we have deviated quite a bit, so
Yeah,
I
we
just
kind
I just want to pull it back a bit.
bring me
Um,
back.
bring you back. So another takeaway I got from your book was the emphasis on the idea of eternal truths that transcend the culture.
Mm.
Um, how would we go about identifying those without falling into a hard line of dogmatism?
Well, that's a very important thing, and I think it is a really important thing. The thing is that the most important things in this world are invisible. So to prove that to you, what I need to say is, so for example, um, love itself is invisible. You see it through behavior, maybe, but when somebody says, I love you, what does that actually mean? Our values, the things that we actually drive us, we can't actually see them. They're all our motivations. We can't see them, but in fact, they drive our behavior. And when our actual real values are at variance with our behavior, which sometimes is very difficult to see, but we're basically hypocrites. So what is really important to us is invisible, and the invisible controls the visible. So this was an Egyptian thing, which I quote in the book about, the things above control the things below. This is ancient Egyptian wisdom. So when we talk about what you're heading towards, we're in a world in which, I mean, I again itemize this, but there are three philosophies which actually now dominate our culture. Postmodernism. The thing about postmodernism is it asks the question, what is truth? And in fact, there isn't any. So it actually is a skeptical kind of philosophy where you doubt everything. Well, people don't want to be in a state of doubt. Subjectivism, in which, there's no objective reality. There's only what I think. That's it. Let me tell you about my truth at the expense of truth. And then materialism, which denies, of course, there is any kind of spiritual reality, that everything is just simply atoms and it's all down here. That's all it is. Despite the fact there's plenty of evidence to the contrary, people believe this kind of nonsense. So essentially, we are in a really bad situation because these things are very negative. They're very bad for our health, physically, spiritually, psychologically. They don't give us anything to believe in. We can't believe anything. All the evidence suggests that actually when you do believe something, it's liberating. Having limits is liberating for human beings, just as having form in poetry. If the poetry is formless, it's ugly. If you've got form, it starts like a song. It starts becoming beautiful. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question directly, but what I'm saying is by writing about this in my book, I'm inviting people to reassess what they really think about the current philosophies which are doing the rounds in our culture and have been doing so for 50 years or more, and actually taking a different view to seek the truth. I mean, Pontius Pilate famously said, "What is truth?" And then, because Jesus said at the trial, "I am the truth." What is truth? And again, sort of on the basis of that, crucified him, knowing, apparently, according to the story, that from his wife, he said, "This man's innocent, don't do it." But he still went ahead, because if you don't value truth, you'll do anything. Because actually, there's no condemnation for you, because what is, it doesn't matter. But deep in our consciences, I think we do know there is a truth. I think C.S. Lewis said something along the same lines when he said something like, we can only know what light is because we see. If we were actually creatures who are in total darkness, we wouldn't know what light is. And the same is true of truth. In fact, we know what truth is because, in a sense, it's actually something external to ourselves that we refer to when we want to refute somebody else. When we refute somebody else, we say, "Well, you're wrong. The truth is this," and then refer. So all the time, even if we may not have the truth ourselves, we're referring to something outside ourselves, which is truthful.
See, that's a really profound point as well, isn't it? Actually, speaking of profound points, you not any spoilers for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, but you end with Odysseus as the hero for today that we should all rally behind. Why not Achilles? Why not Heracles?
Well, of course, I'm looking to write a second book on Heracles because that is such a fascinating thing. So the reason I explain actually in the text is two or three reasons. The first reason is the actual fact, why is Odysseus actually, in a sense, more famous than Heracles? Why is Odysseus and the Odyssey, the symbol of the West, why has that become such a dominant kind of image? In fact, there's a new film coming out on the Odyssey, starring Matt Damon in the next 2 or 3 months. So there's yeah. So essentially, the reason is because Heracles is semi-divine. So when I talked about the ages of the Greek heroes, there was the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and then there's the Iron Age. Actually, Odysseus just tips into the Iron Age because he has got absolutely no divine powers. Achilles' mother is a goddess, Thetis. He was dipped in the river Styx, and so was made virtually invulnerable. So he was a Bronze Age hero. Theseus would be a Silver Age hero. Heracles is the greatest of them all, the Golden Age hero. So essentially, we find it easier to identify with Odysseus because he's like us.
Yeah,
He is
I
a
did pick up on the emphasis on
Yeah,
his
he is
humanity.
like us. He actually hasn't got superpowers like Spider-Man or like Clark Kent. He actually has got to rely upon, he's a fighting man. He's a fighting man. He's very reverent towards the goddess Athene, who incidentally is the goddess. She's the goddess of wisdom. So it's enabled him to work out how to defeat the most horrendous enemies, like the Cyclops, for example, Polyphemus. So I think we pick up on Odysseus because we can identify. And the other thing to say about that is as well is that the journey home to Penelope, his wife, his faithful wife, is also symbolic because his journey home to Ithaca is our journey home because she represents not just his wife, but his soul. So he's actually finding his own soul. Each one of us is born into the world in a lost state where we have to find who we really are. I mean, how many people do you see on social media who are looking to find themselves?
No, no, that's just actually made me think a different way of looking at it. Actually, we spoke earlier about knowing thyself.
Yeah,
And also now thinking about it, given that insight from you, Odysseus' journey is literally about finding himself. It's a spiritual return.
it's a spiritual return. It's a
I know.
spiritual return where all the problems of his life are resolved. And here's the great thing about it, of course, despite the suffering, despite the time, 20 years away, and the agony. And in fact, you could argue that the first 10 years are, the first 10 years, I mean, could equate to the first 20 years of our life between 20 and 40 when we've got to fight in the war to make our careers, to get promoted, to do this, to do that. And then when we turn 40, James Hollis would refer to this. He's a Jungian psychoanalyst. He would refer to this as like, searching for meaning. We've done the fighting. Now we've got to find ourselves. We've got to, before we die, resolve the tensions in our life which have been left unresolved. So the last 20 years, 40 to 60, or longer if you're lucky, are all about finding who you are. But the great thing is, of course, according to the myths, if you undertake this arduous journey, if you undertake this, and it's entered the language, this odyssey, you can truly, and you're humble before the gods. See, actually, have I got time to say this? You see,
Yeah, take your time.
the one moment, which was a huge mistake for Odysseus that really tripped him up on the trip was against the Cyclops, Polyphemus. He outwitted him. He told it his name was nobody. And he got in, he got back to his ship, he got out away from it all. And he knew that Polyphemus was the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. He said, "Ha ha! I've got you. I have actually outwitted you.
There's
My
your
name is,
hubris.
yeah, hubris." And at that moment, Polyphemus, who's been blinded, prays to his father Poseidon for revenge. Ta! And then what would have been a straightforward trip home, suddenly with the god, the brother of Zeus against him, becomes this terrible journey. And in actual fact, that moment of hubris, I would say, you could call it like sin if you want to in the Christian terminology, but it's like every one of us feels that there was something we did once in our life, a wrong turning we made, something that was not very good, a mistake, whatever it is, but sort of derailed us and made life a lot more difficult than perhaps it might have been. So this is a salutary lesson for all of us to be like Odysseus on the journey home to find our faithful self, the real self, not the false self-image, not the thing we project to other people, but the real me. That's why it's such a powerful myth.
So, just following on from that, is there hope for modern culture as a populace, or are we in this? I'm butchering this. Do you see hope for the modern culture, or are we in a phase of collapse, decline, and we're going to have a renewal, like a renaissance in this sort of sense of
Yeah, I
things?
get what you're getting. Well, firstly, let's always remember that lovely proverb, the darkest hour is just before the dawn.
Hmm.
We currently have an absolutely appalling government. It's corrupt and it's incompetent, and it is truly at a level of inability that is staggering. So, in terms of the UK, we are in a deep, deep, deep hole. But One of the great stories, which again I cover in my book, I think it's chapter 7, is of course the myth of Pandora. And Pandora is the equivalent of Eve in the biblical story, who the evils of the world come out as a result of opening the jar or the box, as they call Pandora's box. But of course, there is one thing left in the box which doesn't escape, and
And
that
that's
is
hope.
hope. And so we have to believe in hope. We have to believe in hope. We have to work towards the good. And we have to trust the gods, or actually, I'll be quite clear about it. Actually, I'm a Christian myself. God, I see the gods of the Greeks as being part of those internal energies that Jung talked about. I see them in very psychological terms. But essentially, we have to trust that, in fact, good is going to come, and each one of us can end our life. You see, I mean, how is your life? How is your life? If you ask yourself, how is your life? Score it out of 10. How out of 10 do I feel my life has been? Am I a 6 out of 10 average? Is it 9 out of 10? Is it 3? My life is totally bad. Is it 10 out of 10? Well, nobody could actually really know what their life is until they reach the last second. At the last second, you then, it closes. The narrative closes. Here's the story. It's complete. Is it good? Is it bad? At that point, I believe you find out definitively. But the nearer you come to finding your own soul, the closer you come to knowing in advance of the definitive moment what it's going to be like. The scorecard, there's a scorecard at the end. And by the way, every culture, every religion has a day of judgment. Even, and I make this point in the book, even the most sort of, as it were, hippie friendly religion of all, Buddhism, has hell. But they call it something different. What do they call it? They call it reincarnation. What is reincarnation except I'm coming back as a bug? Yeah, right. So, it's a form of hell. There is a judgment. It's almost built into us. We know we're heading toward, and the Greek myths are very good at explaining this and exploring it. Uh, the middle of the book, the middle of my book, chapter 12 chapters, chapter 6 is all about one hero, Orpheus. And what does Orpheus do? He descends into hell to retrieve the woman that he loves. And one of the points I make in passing is, I mean, various heroes go into hell. Odysseus goes into hell, but not very far.
No.
Theseus goes into hell, gets stuck. Heracles actually goes into hell, goes even deeper and releases Theseus, but not Prometheus. But actually, Orpheus goes deeper even than Hercules, which is the Greeks telling us that poetry and music is stronger than strength. So the strong man can go this far into hell, but Orpheus actually gets right before the throne of Hades himself. And by the way, as he sings and recites his poetry going down, all hell is suspended. Sisyphus starts stopping rolling the stone up. Tantalus stops trying to drink. Conscious rationality starts returning to all the creatures, lost souls in hell, through the singing. The singing. It's quite universe, one song, universe. It's a song. We're in a song. We're in a story, and we're making part of that story. So Orpheus goes right down to the very depths. And by the way, it's said as well, which I think your listeners might find interesting. It's like, for the first and only time in the whole of Greek mythology, Hades, the god of death, as he listens to Orpheus sing, a tear forms in his eye that's as black as tar. A tear, black as tar, that even the Lord of Death can feel something from the singing. It's just an amazing story.
Absolutely is. And actually, it reminds me of a film. There was a movie with Robin Williams. This is how far back we're going.
Yeah.
Um, called What Dreams May Come. I don't know if you've seen this film.
I have not seen that film. No.
Right. So the main premise is he dies. It's quite unfortunate. He's very loved by his family, all that sort of thing. And he sort of is hovering about haunting his family, but his wife can't cope, and she takes her own life. And the way it happened, as it's described in the film, if you take your own life, you're going to hell because you're not supposed to do that.
It's a standard thing for all cultures have this view. It's
Absolutely,
taking your own life
absolutely.
is a mistake, which incidentally we've got currently in our own culture.
Yeah,
Assisted dying is assisted
yeah, it's
suicide,
awful.
basically.
And he basically, Robin Williams' character is like, I want to be with her. And like, you can't because she's gone to hell because she killed herself. He's like, well, fuck that. And he literally goes on this journey. And it's a very artistic movie, almost like he's moving through watercolor paintings. Quite beautiful in
Oh, that
places.
sounds great.
But he goes all the way down into this pit and he finds her stuck in this loop of screaming and not being able to find her way out and things. It's very dark. There's lots of people down there. They don't know where they are. They're confused. But he manages to find his wife, and obviously there's a happy ending and things. But again, modernity, however you pronounce it, is just taking a story of old and modernizing it.
Yes,
And
yes,
that film is very, very good and it's
yes.
very
I'll look out
thought-provoking.
for it.
Yeah,
I shall look out for it with
it's
my
quite
subscription.
it's
Yeah,
quite
yes.
it's
See if
quite an
it's on
old movie
Netflix.
now. It might be.
Yeah,
It's an old
it might
film.
be.
It
No, it's
might.
great, but it's an interesting point you just made, which is that actually, in fact, in a way, there's only a limited number of real stories that
Absolutely.
really get. I mean, one of my favorite, well, probably my all-time favorite film of all times. It used to be The Outlaw Josie Wells with Clint Eastwood, but actually it was replaced by The Lord of the Rings, the three-volume trilogy by Peter Jackson. I mean, that idea of going to Mount Doom with the ring, I mean, it's just awesome conceptually. It's just an awesome conception. And of course, he did it so well, and the actors were just so brilliant, and the special effects was just so. I mean, what an awesome story! Like, to go to that far. I've come to do this thing. Now I cannot do the thing that I have come to do. The ring is mine. And the breakdown of the will at that moment when, you're verge of success, and then how evil undoes itself with
Mm,
Golem lurking in the shadows. Genius. Genius
absolutely
film.
is.
Genius.
To be fair, I'm not. I've been told by my wife I've got to sit down and rewatch them because I watched them when they first come out, and I
Yeah.
was quite a young man, and I was not interested. It
Well,
just
have a go.
I wanted to see big like mythical battles, and
Yeah.
I was not sold on after the first movie, so I haven't watched them since. But I've pledged to my wife that I will give them a second try another day.
Oh,
Call.
wives can be very wise. My wife's very wise. She's wiser than me. So give it another go.
No, no, I will. I will. Right. Final point,
Go on
because
then.
I appreciate that. Our final question. I've taken a lot of your time. If my viewers and listeners were to take one thing from your book after reading it, just one key thing, what do you think that 10 should be?
I think that the whole thing leads up to the notion that there is a spiritual reality beyond this world, and the idea that the material world can satisfy us is completely false. There is something beyond it now. Whichever direction you want to go in, you choose. I'm not trying to preach to you about this religion or that religion, or even about the Greek myths themselves, but the Greek myths point to a reality above this reality. And that, I think, all cultures at all times have always known. These just happen to have told some particularly brilliant stories about it, which are so resonant. But there is a reality beyond this reality. And it does mean as well, although I don't say this in the book, but it means that death is not the end.
Mm.
Death is not the end. We're heading towards something else. There's a new reality that's going to emerge. And this is actually something, to use the word we've used before, to hope for. It's a hope that we have that actual fact, as with Odysseus gets home and the tensions and the problems are resolved. We too, in our lives, can get home, but it doesn't alter the fact. And again, I will have a knock at something else here, which I think you'll possibly like, possibly not. But given what I've known about you so far, Dean, maybe you will like it. But it's that some people will get lost. They will get lost and they will be forever lost. And it's what they call hell. And the thing is, it sounds wicked, like, oh, God's put you. It's not that God puts you in hell, it's you put yourself there. You put yourself in hell. You actually have got to listen to the cues, respond to what your promptings are, do research what you can research, and go towards Ithaca, go towards getting home to find your soul so that you are released from all the negativity that can pull you down.
And I think that is a fantastic place to end it. So James Sale, author of God's Heroes and Us.
God's Heroes and Us.
There it
Available
is.
on Amazon.
Yeah, the link will be below in the description as well.
Oh,
thank you
fantastic.
ever so much for your time today.
Well, thank you, Dean. It's been really great. It's the first time I've met you. Your viewers don't know that, but actually just meeting this one time, I like you a lot. You seem a really great guy. And I hope I talk to you again at some point in the future.
I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will, especially about the Dante's books that are on the way.
Oh, yes.
We'll definitely do that.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. God bless everyone.
Take care.